We're now streaming, Pat, correct?
We are almost. It's just taking a minute to buffer, and we are good. So I will
Very
turn it
good.
back.
So apologies for those on YouTube maybe watching. We've called the meeting to order, done Pledge of Allegiance in attendance. All councilors are in attendance. We've got a motion to approve the memorandum of the June 15th, 2020 regular meeting. There's been a first from Councilor Plunkett and a second from Councilor Choi. And we're going to do a roll call vote on that motion.
Okay. President Garrett?
Yes.
Vice President Traylor?
Yes.
Councilor Burke?
Yes.
Councilor Choi?
Yes.
Councilor Culp?
Yes.
Councilor Melton?
Yes.
And Councilor Plunkett?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good. The memorandum of the June 15th, 2020 regular town council meeting is approved by a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed. Next up, we have request to speak. Anyone who would wish to speak may raise their hand electronically and we will call on them.
We do have one.
We've got one, Mr.
Yes.
Triscari. If you would promote him to speaker.
Okay. Okay, you should be able to speak.
Very good, Mr. Triscari. You're now in the meeting, although I see you're on mute. If you can give your name and address, and after that, you'll have 3 minutes for your topic.
Okay, so my name is Craig Triscari. I also have Barbara Triscari here with me. If I can't make the statements, I would like to add a time, or she can complete the statements. I'm at 3270 Paddock Road. As of 7/6/20, Van Trust has still failed to run the 8-inch water line into Saratoga after November 2008 ordinance passing. Van Trust is still in violation and total disregard of the Zionsville official commitment letter of that time in 2018. I'd like to read again a portion of Van Trust revitalization tax giveaway. Remember, this property is in the middle of the residential rural homes in this community. It's not on an island. I don't know if this comment was put into the final comments that we'll talk about later, but where it states, whereas the town council finds the area is an area that has become undesirable or impossible or normal development occupancy because of lack of development, cessation of growth, deterioration of substandard buildings or other factors, etc. That statement is really a slap in the face to the Perry Township community, especially since we're surrounding that area for this revitalization zone. You have created in this area what I would consider a circular tax firing squad because you're bordered on 3 towns. So this business have the opportunity to literally go across the street in your revitalization zone to another town that offers less value or money in taxes. And just to give you an example for this revitalization area and tax giveaway, for this piece of property, this multi-billion-dollar company is paying 0 taxes the first year, which our homes were devalued and we're paying 100% of our taxes. The second year, they're paying 5% during the second year. And the kicker is after 10 years, they're only paying 95%. Okay, so I have 2 words for this committee. It's called Subaru and Whitestown. When the 10-year period was up, they simply just went down the street. In this case, they can literally go across the street for the same kind of deal. And you can go ahead and have these companies circular around Zionsville, Whitestown, and Lebanon, continue to go ahead and fleece your community when it comes to these tax abatements. Now, I agree there should be some tax abatements to go ahead and generate businesses in those areas, even though I don't want this warehouse to be in that area. But you're leaving about $1.4 million on the table with this developer, easily $1.4 million. Most of your revenue will be coming in the last 3 or 4 years. That's if there's not a recession or a depression or there's other incidences or problems that come. And to also just let you know, you have a lot of power right now. They are going to build this facility. They just finished building their wire optics that surrounded our entire community. So they are going to build this. This is not a question that they won't build it and you won't keep them here and you won't entice them here. You have the opportunity to actually get additional funding from this community and actually put it back into the Perry Township community that you've taken out of. And this is an opportunity, once again, that you guys can go ahead and move forward on, or you can go ahead and give them 95% tax abatements after 10 years. And I've seen reasonable areas where it's 10% the first year, 20% the second year, 30% the next year, on to 100% after 10 years. And those are some of the ones that I've seen, not only in Whitestown, but I've also seen in Lebanon. So I'd like you to consider that as we're going through this. And I'm gonna have some other statements that I want to address after they go ahead and read out their statements. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sperry. Appreciate it. I don't see any other hands raised. Amy, very good, thank you. And so we will move on now to old business. There is no old business, so we'll quickly move on to new business. New business, first one up is a resolution to call for social justice. This is resolution 2020-08. And is very not only timely, but also important. I know it's something that Councillor Choi has been helping to spearhead. And if you don't mind, Councillor Choi, maybe I could turn it over to you for a minute or two to just explain what it is this resolution is and what we're hoping to accomplish.
So this resolution is in response to what happened to George Floyd back in late May in Minnesota. I think that woke up the country that there are still considerable issues in how we address our Black community, as well as a variety of issues with maybe a lot of other minorities as well. But definitely as it pertains to the Black community and with law enforcement treatment and the relationships there. I think that a community like ours, even though we live in a very different type of world than, say, other urban communities, still have a responsibility to make sure that our Black residents and neighbors feel that they are welcome and protected when they are here. And as such, I want to make sure that we as a town council support a resolution like this. I will say that to my disappointment, when I was out campaigning last year, that I ran into several of our residents who, for the lack of a better term, are very racist against our Black neighbors. That wasn't the overall sentiment of most of the people that I talked to, but surprisingly, it was very front and center with a few neighbors that I did have conversations with. And if you look on some social media channels, you can see that this is not unique to just a few doors that I knocked on, but that there is some problem in our community. And we as town council, we as elected officials, I believe, have a responsibility to make sure that our community is inclusive and that people are welcome here. Regardless of who they are, and especially our Black neighbors, because to be perfectly honest, when I have given this example before, when I get pulled over, I think to myself, was I speeding? Was one of my lights out? I don't think to myself as a person, when I get pulled over, am I going to be accused of a crime that I didn't commit? Am I going to face some kind of physical repercussions? Those are not the fears that I had. But even in our community, my Black neighbors go through that kind of fear anytime that they are pulled over. They should never have to endure that kind of feelings when they are pulled over by law enforcement. And many, actually all of the ones that have had interactions with our Zionsville Police Department, to be fair to our ZPD, have commented on how professional they are and how cordial they are. So we want to make sure that that kind of that type of response, it continues with our incredible law enforcement agency and the ZPD. But we as a town council should make sure that as a community that we drive forward initiatives to make sure that we address the issues that are facing our nation today. So in that light, I wanted to make sure that we brought a resolution forward reaffirming that. and start talking as a council and as a community about what we do to make sure that we create a Zionsville that is welcoming to all.
Well said, Councilor Choi. Certainly open the floor to questions about the resolution. Anyone else have thoughts on this? I'm sure the community is welcome to hear those besides Councilor Choi, or including Councilor Choi's.
Will there be a reading of the resolution?
I don't know that we're going to read the whole resolution itself. It will certainly be posted. You know, it is very specific to, and you know, Councilor Choi, you and I worked on this along with Heather Willey, the council attorney. You know, it is, you know, in response to the tragic events that happened with Mr. Floyd up in Minneapolis, and it references both sort of the continuation of what we've tried to do as a community in terms of being open to everyone of national origin, color, religion, race, sexual orientation. This one is specific, though, towards Black members of our community or visitors of our community, and Black Lives Matters specific wording, just to make sure that we were respectful and acknowledging and supportive of those that cause and what they're trying to accomplish. But it's also, I think, more than just words, right? I mean, it's one thing to just say, hey, here's something, you know, put it up and we can move on. I mean, it's really taking some action as well. And it's kind of evolving, you know, as Councilor Choi said, to continue the conversation. So, you know, for us to work with the mayor, who I know is very much in support of this conversation and you know, what we're trying to accomplish here, and has released her own memorandum on that in association with town council. But it's also working with the police. There's a whole section on there. In fact, I'll read that part specifically, where the town council will work with the mayor to review all town policies to ensure our police department and first responders undergo appropriate background checks, receive substantive and ongoing diversity, inclusion, and equity training to prepare them to properly and respectfully engage with all town citizens and are trained on de-escalating conflict resolution techniques, plus the proper timing and use of force. You know, I think what Councilor Choi was talking about, where, you know, a Black member of the community gets pulled over, they by the police, they may have a different experience or the expectation of a different experience than what we may have. And it won't happen overnight. And it's something I think that will take time to address. And, you know, I think to Councilor Choi's point about campaigning and hearing about, you know, unfortunately residents of this community that I believe are very much in the minority that have racist attitudes towards Black members of the community or Black visitors of this community. You know, I acknowledge that probably exists, even if I'm disappointed with it. So being able to have these conversations to move it forward, you know, one step at a time. I know that we have a police chief that is supportive of policies and de-escalation of situations and proper use of force if all else has been exhausted, and don't result in what happened to Mr. Floyd or any person that has an interaction with our police department. So I would encourage anyone in the community right now to read what this is, and you know, I've had dialogue with Black residents about what we can do better and what we're doing right and what we can keep doing. It's important to hear their perspective because I can never understand their perspective.
Yeah, President Garrett, I want to add to this. It was really impressive at the first police commissioner meeting we had, with our new chief of police, Spears. If you noticed his goals for 2000 or till the end of the year, number one, this is way before the tragedy at the end of May, was to work on the relationship with diverse folks in the community and rebuilding that brand with ZPD. And that was his number one focus. If you remember, I think Josh, you were on that one. But I remember going to dinner that night with my wife and saying, this guy, he's on it. And that was before any of this happened. And I was really, really impressed with, number one, his attention to detail and what he was trying to accomplish, and his, I guess, humility about it too. So I just want to add that Chief Spears is an amazing guy, and he already had this on his number one goal for the end of the year, was to, get this out in front of his group and how we interact with diversity and interacting with the community. So I thought that was amazing, and I would back him for that for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Councilor Culp, and I think that was one of the goals of the mayor and the hiring. One of the review criteria was not only diversity in terms of interactions, but also diversity on the police force, and how do we get a more diverse police force. And I had a member of our Zionsville community who is Black, who reached out with some suggestions on ways to recruit and how to get the word out that the more candidates that we get, the better that we'll be. So progress sometimes takes time, but it is progress, and so I appreciate those efforts. Any other comments on this before we take a motion on this? Councilor Burke, if you were saying something, you're on mute.
I just want to thank Councilor Choi for not just his work in putting this resolution together, but for really a lot of public statements over the last month. I think it's important, and I think it's important that this body pass something that's a little more formal. I appreciate also that the mayor's office and the police chief have already publicly come out with a statement about this, but this gives us all a chance to, first time I guess we've gathered in a way to really pass this. But I agree that the police chief, I know after our last call, there was a Black Lives Matter awareness protest event at the town hall. And the mayor was there, the police chief was there, and members of this council were all there. And so I thought it was a strong show of force across the board early on, that there was a cross-functional support from the community. And I'm convinced that this town can remain pro-equality and pro-law enforcement at the same time.
Great.
Gladly support it.
Good. Well, if there's no other comments, Councilor Choi, I would allow you to make the motion if you'd so choose to at your discretion.
I move, thank you very much, President Garrett. I move to adopt resolution to call for social justice at this council meeting.
Very good. I've got a first from Councilor Choi. Is there a second?
A second.
Got a second from Councilor Culp. Amy, do you mind doing the roll call, please?
Sure. President Garrett,
Yes.
Vice President Trailer,
Yes.
Councilor Burke,
Yes.
Councilor Choi,
Very strong yes.
Councilor Culp,
Yes.
Councilor Melton,
Yes.
Councilor Plunkett.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good. Resolution 2020-08 passes with a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed. Next, we've got a confirmatory resolution of the town of Zionsville, Indiana for the designation of an economic revitalization area and approval of real estate property tax abatement application. This is for Van Trust Real Estate LLC. This is resolution number 2020-09. Amy, I believe Mr. Price is representing Van Trust on this.
Yes, I just promoted him to a panelist.
Very good. Matt, if you're available, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Pardon me, Mr. President, members of the council. My name is Matt Price. I'm an attorney with Denton's in Indianapolis, Indiana, and tonight I'm here representing Van Trust. With me via Zoom connection from Van Trust is Rafe Webster, who I believe you've met over the last couple of years in connection with phase 1 and then this phase 2 project as well. And then also I believe available, I'm not sure if he's regular Zoom connection or by telephone, is Jeff Jacob, who has been a real collaborator and partner through this process on behalf of certain of the residents within the Saratoga subdivision, which is the residential neighborhood that adjoins a portion of the of I-65 project. Let me just give a brief overview because it's been a little while since we've spoken about this, and then I can get directly to the request tonight. This parcel is approximately 81 acres. It's west of the Hub I-65 Phase 1, and it is adjoined on two sides, including the Hub I-65 Phase 1 property, by industrial property, industrially zoned property. Property that was rezoned previously by the town of Zionsville to the east, and property that is zoned industrial in Whitestown to the south. And so one of the misnomers that I want to address right off the bat is that this area is in the middle of a residential area. It's really not. It's in the middle of an industrially zoned area. It does have a residential subdivision neighbor that we've discussed several times, that being Saratoga. And we've worked very hard to make sure that the industrially zoned areas were compatible with the adjacent residential areas, and of course have gone the extraordinary step of committing to not only install the water line, but fund the individual homeowner connections to the water line, which was, as I think Mr. Chiscari knows, is actually the case, that the impediment to installing the water line is not any failure of Van Trust, but it's not having the requisite number of connectors. And so we've worked very hard to get around that problem. And Van Trust has never shied away from its obligations with respect to the water line, and has, I've been proud to represent them. They've stood here and stood by their commitment and are here tonight, still ready, willing, and able to fulfill that commitment. The project itself is comprised of two buildings, one just under 400,000 square feet, another just around 900,000 square feet. The total investment that we're proposing in the real property improvements is approximately $48 million. With the abatement that we're requesting, the property, which generates annually today around $3,000 in annual property taxes, would produce over $3.2 million in new property taxes over the next 10 years. And what we are proposing is what those in the industry and the communities themselves sometimes refer to as the traditional abatement, which is the declining abatement schedule that frankly mirrors the abatement schedule that is employed throughout the central Indiana region. And that's why it's called the traditional abatement, at least locally. I know a little bit from experience in some other communities outside of central Indiana that they have similar traditional abatements, although they don't match exactly up with what Indiana calls a traditional abatement, but they have the similar concept, which is the declining abatement over a period of years. And in Indiana, it's been historically been over a period of 10 years. And what that allows these properties and buildings to do, we're proposing to build spec buildings. And what that allows them to do is to build the buildings today and have them available for companies that are seeking space when they need it. And the idea behind the business model is that they go to a great deal of effort to design buildings that are as much in line with what the potential end user is going to need, that they require very little modification in order to be built out for the individual user. And so if a Puma shoe company comes along and needs space in relatively short order, then the building is available to them, and they can make those finishes to it quickly, bring it to market quickly, allow Puma to move in and move their personal equipment in very short order. what's happening really since we began this process and journey in Zionsville with this phase 2 of this project is there's always strong demand in this vicinity for this type of land use. It is very uniquely situated with close proximity to a state road 267, and nestled really between two interstate intersections, or interchanges, interstate interchanges, one being the 267 interchange and then another further south, the contemplated and so-called midpoint interchange, which is planned to be built in the relatively near future. So it was always attractive because of its proximity to the interstate. That's what's really driven the demand in the area and driven the land use changes that we've seen in that vicinity. What's happened since the pandemic is, I would say, is an intensification of that demand. The pandemic has changed supply chain logistics. It has called for retailers and other end users to increase their inventory levels in very short order. And there's been, without question, an accelerated acceptance of an already robust e-commerce economy. And so what experts are predicting is that the demand for facilities such as what we're proposing here this evening for a tax abatement will actually accelerate in the coming years. And they're projecting more square footage of space being devoted to these particular uses. And so we believe that this will be a project that will be highly sought after. Now, in order to be sought after, though, it needs to be competitive. It needs to be on an equal footing with not only jurisdictions that are nearby, but jurisdictions that are located elsewhere in the state and across the country that are offering similar space, and they need to have terms that are substantially equivalent so that when they respond to an RFP request, which happens very frequently, when they respond to that they're positioned to be able to bring that end user to Zionsville. I really believe, and I've said this before, that those end users will also bring an additional dividend to the town in the form of additional personal property investment. That this real property investment is in some ways setting the table for the meal, the additional meal to be served, which is the personal property investment. When we met back on June 1st to consider the declaratory resolution, I think it was either that day or maybe the day before, there was an announcement in Whitestown about a new Coke facility that was being built in Whitestown. About $40 million of that investment was in real property, but the other 15 million of the 55 million investment was in personal property. And so that $40 million investment set the table for yet an additional $15 million in investment. That example is somewhat conservative compared to other examples where the personal property investment can rival and even equal the amount of real property investment depending on the end user involved. But what we want to be able to do from a Van Trust perspective is position this property to be competitive, to be able to respond to RFPs that we think there's going to be more and more of, particularly in looking at this area where there's been a great deal of investment in infrastructure and more to come, and to make this a small portion of the overall Zionsville that can be devoted to competitive distribution and logistics oriented projects. And so that's why we're seeking the standard tax abatement. I did want to mention that's been discussed a couple of different times about the finding that's in the declaratory resolution, and that would be confirmed tonight, about whether the words from the statute are normal development could proceed without this form of abatement. And I want to be clear about really two things. One is the revitalization area does not encompass any property that is zoned residential. It does not encompass the Saratoga development at all. And it really doesn't speak to the Saratoga project at all. Saratoga is a fully built project. Its only involvement really in this matter is that the parties have worked very hard to adequately screen and buffer it from the new industrial users. And of course, there is the additional agreement with regard to the installation of the water line and the payment for the connections. But as far as the tax abatement, it really does not implicate Saratoga or any of the homeowners at all, any more than it implicates any residential property within this greater vicinity that may be adjacent to a revitalization area. And that's true really throughout Zionsville, where the abatement tool has been used. It only encompasses the area that's the subject of the abatement and really doesn't speak to other finished developments. It certainly doesn't speak to their attractiveness or their ongoing vitality in any way. And in fact, in this particular instance, it's the other way around. This project, by virtue of bringing a public water system to the Saratoga subdivision, actually seeks to assure the long-term vitality of the Saratoga development, which is one of the great things about this project and one of the great things that Van Trust has done in sticking by its commitment as part of pursuing this additional phase of this project. And then secondly, with regard to that finding is really a statement that you find in a number of different statutes. It has to do with whether a project of this sort would go forward without abatement. And I heard Mr. Triscari say that because of some action, I wasn't particularly clear of what it was, but because of some action that Van Trust had taken recently with regard to fiber or something, that indicated that it was going to go forward with the phase 2 project, irrespective of whether it obtained tax abatement. And I want to be clear about that Van Trust would not be able to go forward with the project, acquire the property, if it did not receive tax abatement. And it's simply because it would not be able to bring a viable project to the marketplace. It would not be on an even footing with other respondents, either in central Indiana, across Indiana, or across regions. And so we think we definitely satisfy the but-for test here, just as other projects have done in Zionsville, both with respect to industrial projects and other projects, and that this project is actually part of a greater landscape that is filled with economic revitalization areas that have done an excellent job of helping to diversify the tax bases in communities like Lebanon, Whitestown, and Zionsville's at the beginning stages of that as well with regard to logistics type enterprises. And so for those reasons, we would respectfully request your confirmation of the establishment of the revitalization area. Rafe Webster and I would be available to answer any questions that you have. And we've been sincerely appreciated our opportunity to work with the town over the last several months, both with respect to the zoning process and hopefully this last step before we move on to the development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Councilors, before we go into questions, this is a public hearing. Typically, I would wave around a piece of paper to show that we have proof of publication of this hearing. However, in this case, I don't have that piece of paper, but I do have, share my screen, proof of publication. Oops, sorry, that's the wrong one. Proof of publication, so this will serve as proof of publication for this particular hearing. With that, I will open the public hearing. If there's any member of the audience who would like to speak on this matter, please raise your hand virtually and we'll promote you to speak. We have one person so far. You able to promote that person? Mr. Triscari would like to speak on this, Amy? Very good, thank you. Mr. Triscari, same rules as the public speaking. If you state your name and address for the record, and if your wife is still present, can have up to 6 minutes of time to speak specifically on this matter.
Yes, my name is Craig Triscari, Barbara Triscari, 32 7. They understand I only have 6 minutes after the 15 minutes of discussion. I do want to point out that it's not two sides, as Van Trust lawyer put out. It's actually three sides. It's actually one side that they're next to for industrial. They're next to Saratoga 400, and then the farm and the farmhouses on 300. So it's three sides, not one or two. Last year, we've talked, or 2 years ago, we talked about the development of Van Trust structures, which you did give them a tax abatement as well for the structure for phase 1 that has gone in. They're requesting a lot more lenient requirement for phase 2, in that they're only paying 95% after 10 years, which is not the norm, and it's not traditional. I understand the lawyer from Van Trust is talking that that's a traditional amount. It is not necessarily a traditional amount to say 5% for the second year and 95% for year 10. Also, I'd like to point out that.
Can I ask something? Are we allowed to put him on pause and do anything here?
President Garrett, you're on mute.
Sorry, and I'll stop your time there, Mr. Scary. If we can just let him speak, and then we can have a discussion amongst the council, if that's good. If that's good, Jason.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. Okay. Mr. Scary, if you want to continue, I'll give you some of that time back for.
Some of the structures, both in Lebanon and in Zionsville, some of those structures are much different than what you call traditional. And I'm not speaking that you cannot and you should not provide incentives for the companies, because I do believe that's a part of it. I do believe they've overextended that part in the requirement and requests that they have. And I do believe that you have quite a bit of money on the table that you can go ahead and collect from this company in the community. They mentioned also that they weren't planning on building this. It was a spec that they would build and then get individuals in there. But in the meeting that we had prior to this, Van Trust made it very clear that it was speculative as far as building the site. They weren't going to necessarily build the site because they were waiting for somebody to go ahead and get into phase 1. And once they did get somebody into phase 1, they would consider construction on this other site. The power that you have right now in negotiating that difference is much higher. The fact that you've surrounded this community in the last 3 years, and we're not talking a decade, we're not talking 5 years. This is the last 3 years, with most of those industrial facilities not yet completed in this area. So this community has gone 3 years of construction in and around their community with those sounds and everything else, and you've condemned it for another 3 years of this development within this community. At least get something for it. And what I mean something for it is this community, and specifically when you talk about we talk about Saratoga, but Saratoga is not the only issue or concern. It's a Southern Perry Township concern and the wells that are concerned in this area. Van Trust mentioned, that they're bringing clean water and other things. I have clean water. So I have clean water. I have water that I use and pay for, and so does a majority or a lot of other individuals in Southern Perry Township that are doing, not just Saratoga, which has been impacted in the last 3 years with Van Trust development. They mentioned in their study that it's shale structure for the usage of the well water, and that's one of the studies that they put forward to this committee. And that there were several houses that had that. If you look on DNR, it specifically says that there's a higher rate of contamination based off of that kind of structure of wells within this area. Okay, so I'm not going to come back to Zionsville if my well gets contaminated. God forbid it does, or my well dries. I'm not going back to Van Trust. I'm going to DNR. And I think it would have been a good idea for this committee to have gone to DNR and actually worked out the well issues.
Mr. Triscari, the issue on the table is the abatement. So if you could keep your topics around the abatement, The project has been approved. This is around the abatement. If you have concerns around the abatement or questions, this is what your time is for. This is what the public hearing is for. It's about the abatement.
I got you. Yeah, thank you. But I'm speaking to a document that he has in the file. This is not something that I'm just pulling out.
Your time to speak in general topics was the time you had earlier. The time to speak about the abatement specifically is now.
Okay.
You can
All right,
limit your topic to the abatement. I would appreciate
Okay,
it.
sure. Okay. All right. So I'll leave that for another time. So what I would just tell this group is that when they say they're not going to develop or build in that area, they're not going to get an opportunity like this to build in this area again. They're not, because what you've done in building in this area, this is an opportunity that they know that they should never have gotten the opportunity to build in. To go 10, 20, 30, 40, and to pay 100%, a minimum of 100% after 10 years is something that you guys should absolutely consider. And I don't know why they're paying 5% after the second year. That doesn't make any sense either. Traditional, again, I've seen in those facilities, both in Whitestown and Zionsville, it's been 10, 20, 30, up to 100%. You're giving the house away, and I would request that you probably look at that, because there's a lot more money on the table that you're giving away. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Triscari. Appreciate it. If there are any other members who would like to speak on this, I don't see any hands. I will close the public meeting. Okay, Councilor Plunkett, it sounds like you had a few statements or questions, so I'll let you lead things off here.
Yeah, I think it's just important to note that this is not the first time we've been down this path. I mean, we did this in January of 2019. The mid-January council meeting, we looked at the first Van Trust property and the Bucknell property. And, you know, the idea of Mr. Triscari says that, you know, this is a completely different deal. This is the exact same abatement schedule that we voted on in January of 19. Also important to note that at that same time, we looked at the quote unquote traditional 10-year plan as being presented now. We looked at a flat 50% abatement over a 10-year window, and we looked at a 10% reduction every year, year over year for that 10-year window as well. Given those three options, the difference between a traditional abatement and one that Mr. Triscari has even referenced is almost $900,000 in favor of the town on that project from back in January. Similar deal here. It's the exact same abatement, schedule. So, I mean, I just think it's important to note that, you know, it comes across as if we get this, and I know the comments that have been made about, you know, the council, and I feel like many of those are unfair. The reality is we've done our due diligence on this project, and it's a good project, and the abatement schedule is one that I'm in support of.
Well, I think to your point, Councilor Plunkett, I mean, I've had similar thoughts when I joined council that Mr. Triscari had, which is, can we get a better deal? And so I went to talk to independent experts to understand what does that mean. And basically, if you create a one-off scenario that is not traditional, you're at the bottom of the line because they don't want to deal with it, right? Even if it's just kind of not that much money, you know, go from 0.5 to 0.10 or something like that. And so, you know, we always want to create the best deal for our residents, for the community. You know, I feel we've done that with some of the commitments that have been made for the area, up to and including not appealing that assessment when it comes out. I don't think there's any more room to negotiate without losing a deal, without jeopardizing a deal, which just goes against, talk about leaving a lot of money on the table if you jeopardize the deal. So just my 2 cents, but certainly councilors, if you have questions for Mr. Price or the developers on this request, you know, please go forward.
Could I take a second to ask a couple of questions here?
Yeah, please.
One I wanted to ask, and this is not particular to the abatement, but it's a point that Mr. Triscari brought up. So I'd like to hear a comment from Jeff Jacob, who represents almost all of the other residents in the Saratoga area. Mr. Triscari made the comment that this is not about the water system because he has good water, but that who represents all the other residents. That's not the overwhelming feeling of the other residents there. So although that part is not about the tax abatement, I feel that it's important to address his comment just because he broached that topic. Is that okay to do, or should this be done at a little later time?
Heather, I assume since it was brought up, it's no problem to go down that path.
No, it's okay. You can go ahead and ask that question.
So if we could promote Mr. Jeff Jacob, if he's available to
Yeah, I
answer
actually see
that
him
question.
there. He's Jeff, if you want to answer Councilor Choi's question there.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Choi, the residents that I represent feel as though they have a water problem in the area. And they've negotiated a deal for the phase 1 portion, which will have its time when things ripen and we get far enough along in the project, that phase will be installed. The phase 2 portion of that is contingent upon this portion of this project moving forward. So those folks have a water problem. They believe this is the best path forward and would support the town council granting this abatement as requested.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jacob. I do have a second comment to make, one particular to the abatement. So when I did research around this, myself being a new council member, I asked Wayne DeLong if this abatement schedule that we're talking about right now is consistent with other abatements offered by other municipalities around us, and he did confirm yes. And then in my reaching out to others to research this issue, I found that there are several different types of abatements, but two that were fairly prominent are the 10-year traditional, which what's being offered now is what's considered the 10-year traditional. So in my mind, when you call something a traditional, it's probably the one that is particularly commonplace. So we have the schedule of 100, 95, 80, 65, 50, yada, yada, yada. Then there was another one that I saw called the 10-year even declining, which is what Mr. Triscari referred to as if you get 100% abatement the first year, and then you get at least 10% the second year, you're giving away the farm by asking only for 5%. The difference when you further march this out is you get for the 10-year even declining that he's referring to, which is 100, 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, 10% declining over 10 years. You actually, when you add up all the abatements for that, you come out with a 55% discount over the course of 10 years. When you look at the traditional 10-year plan, which gives away, which only collects 5% the first year, but in year 2 collects 20%, year 3 collects 35%, and then follows the standard schedule. If you actually march that out, it's a 49.5% discount. So the traditional actually garners more revenue than what Mr. Triscari is offering up as the even declining, at least by my math. I could be wrong, but I've gone over this several different times. So I don't think we're giving away the farm with this. I don't think that this is something that you have to be competitive with neighboring municipalities to be able to attract business. And although I don't love the idea of offering discounts, that's the world we live in. So, and in this case, it's competitive, it's traditional, it's commonplace. So I would be very much in support of this tax abatement. Thank you.
Matt, one thing that was mentioned, it's kind of an interesting point, is this idea that given the nature of being of Lebanon, Zionsville, and Whitestown right there was a comment made, that, after 10 years, someone could just move across the street and get a new abatement. Is that the reality?
It's not there's a couple of reasons for that are practical. One is that the lease terms are typically longer than the 10-year abatement. So the initial lease term, for example, maybe 15, 20 years. Secondly, there's a practical problem is that many of these users install a great deal of personal property, and it's not as easy to move once it's built into the facility itself. And so there's some negative to trying to relocate just at a whim. And frankly, in the world that we observe around between Whitestown and Zionsville and Lebanon, you do not see that jumping across the street. You see new users coming to the marketplace, and with the infrastructure that we have in place and with the growing demands that I mentioned earlier, I think you're going to see more new users coming to the market.
And I guess one other thing that's sort of been a theme here over the last couple of months is this idea of non-compliance. When the commitments were made, from Van Trust to the community, there seems to be this implication that all these commitments need to be filled before they dig one hole and start putting up, any of the building.
Right.
My understanding is those commitments remain, and we plan on enforcing them, and Van Trust plans on providing them. They've never not had that conversation, but that they may sometimes happen in parallel. So it's not a matter of, all right, we've committed to do X, Y, and Z. We can't do anything until X, Y, and Z is done. We can start doing X and start building, and then do Y while we're building, and Z as we finish up. And that's still in compliance with the spirit and legal nature of the agreement. Is that correct?
It is correct. I would say that there's also just the reality that when, and Jeff and I have talked about this over the last year, because we've worked very hard at pulling this all together, is that when the original commitment was made, we simply did not understand that there would be the minimum number of connectors in order to make the line live and actually have water running through it. And so rather than dwell on whether the issue was non-compliance or not and the timing for it, what we rolled up our sleeves and started to work on was, how do we make this right? And when the phase 2 opportunity presented itself, we had never lost engagement with Jeff and his clients, and we re-engaged with a new idea. It was met with some early hurdles as far as logistically how we were going to work with it, but we kept plugging away and came up with a solution that worked. And so and worked better than the original commitment, frankly. And so that's where we are today.
Very good. Appreciate that. One point of order. I think I closed the public meeting, but just in case I didn't, public meeting was, or the public, I should say, comment part of that had been closed a while ago, but we'll officially make sure it's still closed. Councilors, any other questions? Councilor Melton, look like I saw your hand first.
Yeah, I have a question for Jeff Jacob. And the question is, Mr. Jacob, did any of your clients before this development project appeal to the town of Zionsville, or to your knowledge to the Whitestown utilities to gain access to water with their failing utilities, or excuse me, their failing wells?
You know, Councilor Melton, I can't speak to that issue directly relative to Zionsville. I do know that people in that subdivision that I represent went through a good deal of research and information and dollars spent trying to solve a failing problem. So I can't speak to what specifically would have done. I can't imagine that they would not have reached out to the nearest utility to find out if there was service and what the availability was.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. You know, I just want to challenge this council to be leaders into the future and bring safe water and sewers to our residents. You know, these sewers that we're providing our residents, I know we're bringing some sewers down West Oak. I'm super excited about that for all of the Russell Lake residents. I just really want to make sure that we get the water and the sewer to our Zionsville residents, and we don't just do it during negotiations with the developers into the future. So I just have that near my heart with regards to this this project as well as projects into the future. So I just would throw that out there as a thought into the future that, you know, we really need to kind of bring this safe water to the rest of our residents. And then, you know, they need sewers too. There's quite a few people that need sewers. So instead of just negotiating with the developers to bring them, the residents, these items, I think Zionsville should be responsible. And I look forward to working with Whitestown into the future for utilities, for Perry Township. But I just, every time we're dealing with additions, especially in this case twice, we had the water line and now we have the connection fee. I just feel like it's interesting that we're always dependent on a developer to extend our water lines or our sewers. And I just want to use caution as we move into the future in depending on the developers to extend some of our sewers and water supplies.
Very good. Councilor Burke, I think you had a question or comment?
Yeah, I've got some clarifying questions. I don't want to belabor this as some of this has been touched upon, but just a few things that, like Alex, I'm trying to just really be diligent in fully understanding this particular project and those similar to this moving forward. But I'd also like to thank all the folks who have continued to join us online, and especially Mr. Triscari, who's diligently embraced this process and raised a number of questions that have been very helpful in encouraging me to ask more questions, including some of these. So just to clarify, because I keep hearing, you know, mixed things, and so maybe Matt or Jeff can answer this, but this impediment to the water line that's still outstanding. I understand apparently there's the water line and then the connections. Is the impediment based on the number of lines for the connections? Is that why they haven't started this, or was there some commitment in phase one to have already started some kind of water line that's not tied to the actual connections?
No, not from our perspective. There was, the issue is this, which is that the requirement from the town of Whitestown in order to have a water line that has water in it is to have a minimum number of connections. And that minimum number of connections, if memory serves, is 17. And so the practical impediment that we had was that there were not 17 homeowners who were prepared to sign up for water such that we could obtain the necessary permits to actually go forward and install the water line.
But there have been 17 for some time. So is there a timeline that you intend to move forward with that, or is that somehow contingent upon this abatement?
It is contingent. There are 17 parties to the development agreement where Van Trust is agreeing to pay either them or their successor a connection fee, which is very different than the commitment to install a line without any obligation to pay a connection fee. And there were not 17 homeowners that were prepared to do that. I should add that Van Trust, and Jeff and I even haven't had an opportunity to vet this fully, but Van Trust has gone forward and paid for the water line design, assuming that the abatement was going to go forward and assuming that that would permit us to go forward and buy the phase 2 property. So they are fully prepared to go forward with the project once they acquire the property. And you may recall this from the timing, is that is an immediate thing. It's not contingent upon building the phase 2 buildings, which I think is an important factor that we discussed during the rezoning as well. It's something that will commence, following their acquisition of the property.
Just to confirm, I know that you countered that, this project is contingent upon this abatement. Is the real estate transaction is complete? Is that right? Van Trust is in full ownership of this property, or is this still on, again, contingent upon this abatement?
It's contingent upon the abatement. It's still owned by the Padgett family.
Right. So it's hard to fully leverage when when this is contingent upon this particular traditional abatement. I'm with Alex. Obviously, no one wants to leave money on the table if we're going to, make this investment. And I'm glad I've talked to Alex about the work that he's done. The traditional approach seems to be the most common, obviously in Zionsville and in the neighboring communities. I don't know if anyone even knows the answer to this, but in Zionsville, where we've offered similar abatements, and I know in phase one, it was the exact same, as Jason has pointed out. How common, I mean, just a guesstimate of percentage, if that makes sense. How common in Zionsville have we used this traditional abatement, or have we embraced an alternative approach? How consistent is this?
Brad, I can tell you from my time on council, 5 years, for this type of project, light industrial distribution project, it's the only abatement that I have seen personally.
Okay, that's very helpful. Okay, those are the only questions I have. Thanks.
Any other comments or questions? Heather, I'm going to put you on the spot.
You may.
I think there was maybe a little bit of the vote sheet I have. Sounds like we need to vote on two different components, right? One is the confirmatory resolution and one is the tax abatement agreement.
We do.
We can make a motion and vote on those together, or we can do them independently. So I'm going to make a motion. Heather, keep me honest here, to approve the confirmatory resolution and the tax abatement agreement as a single vote. If there's a council has a problem with that, fine, let me know. But otherwise, I see a second from Councilor Melton. Amy, can we go through a roll call vote on this motion?
Sure. President Garrett,
Yes.
Vice President Traylor,
Yes.
Councilor Burke,
Yes.
Councilor Choi,
Yes.
Councilor Culp,
Yes.
Councilor Milton,
Yes.
Councilor Plunkett.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very good. Resolution 202009, and which is both I don't know if this is inclusive, but I will say the confirmatory resolution and the tax abatement agreement associated with this passes with a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed. Are there anything you need to add to that?
Nope, I think that will suffice. We just want to make sure and clarify, Amy, for the minutes that we did get a vote on both documents. And councilors, traditionally, we have listed them together because they really go hand in glove. You wouldn't vote on one and not the other. And so we have always listed them together for discussion purposes, and then had a vote either inclusive of both documents or separately. So we appreciate the motion as it was given.
Very good. Next is other matters. Any councilor have any other matters to discuss? Thank you, Mr. Price, by the way. Appreciate it, Mr. Jacob.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the council.
No other matters. We've got the approval of claims. I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve claims.
Second.
Second. Vice President Traylor, just beat your hand there, Councilor Burke. Amy, it's time to shine.
President Garrett,
Yes.
Vice President Traylor,
Yes.
Councilor Burke,
Yes.
Councilor Choi,
Yes.
Councilor Culp,
Yes.
Councilor Melton,
Yes.
Councilor Plunkett.
Yes.
Very good. Claims are approved by a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed. With nothing else, I'd take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make
So
a motion.
moved.
to-
Got a motion from Councilor Plunkett.
Second.
Second from Councilor Choi.
Choi.
President Garrett,
Yeah.
Vice President Traylor,
Yes.
Councilor Burke,
Yay.
Councilor Choi,
Yes.
Councilor Culp,
Yes.
Councilor Melton,
Yes.
Councilor Plunkett.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very good. We are adjourned by a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed. Next regular town council meeting is scheduled for Monday, July 20th, 2020 at 7:30 a.m. This will be a electronic meeting, so feel free to join us via this Zoom link or certainly streaming on YouTube. Everyone have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.